Welcome back to the Peer Perspective Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Van Blairkamp. I'm really excited to introduce my next guest. But before we get started, if you or someone you know might benefit from today's message, please make sure to share and subscribe. Your support means the world. I also wanted to plug our website. It's now live, so make sure you check it out. Go to the bottom and subscribe. Lots of amazing things coming. I can't wait to share it with you guys. Check it out. My next guest, my incredible wife. I can't say enough about her. Honestly, no introduction is going to do her justice. She's been through a tremendous amount of stuff in her life. She came out the other side and she's doing some amazing things with her life. She shows up for other people. She's an advocate. She's a peer. She helps people exiting the prison system. She supports victims of domestic violence. She's in school. She's an amazing mother. She's overcome so much adversity in her life. I'm so, so proud of her. I know you guys are going to be too. Without further ado, here's my wife, Samantha.
How does it feel to be interviewed by your husband?
Really good.
Well, I know you've been kind of nervous about like sharing your story and, you know.
Yeah. I'm always nervous to speak and be vulnerable and
Sure. And then to
throw
blast it on the internet is always fun. So.
Yeah.
Well, I think that it's important to share your story because you never know who you're going to help and who might be touched by, you know, your situation and what you've been through and how you've gotten through it. So I think that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to my sponsor this morning or this afternoon, and I prayed about it. So I think I'm good. I think I know what audience I'm going to be speaking towards today. So
Uh-oh.
no, it's not bad.
Yeah, it'll be good. It'll be good.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, you've waited quite a while.
Yeah, I don't
to
think
do
I've
this.
ever like truly shared my testimony.
Yeah.
So you'll have to help me fill in the gaps later on in the 20s, you know.
Well, I mean, so, yeah, I mean, we've obviously spent a majority of the last, 6 years, going on 7 years now together. Mm-hmm. We've seen a lot of challenges and we've been through a lot together, but your story doesn't start then. It starts, you know, obviously, at childhood. But
Yeah, I mean, it started in 1989.
1989.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're older than me. Well, if you want to start there, I mean, whatever you're comfortable sharing about your childhood and.
Yeah, so I'm Samantha. I go by Sam. I was born in St. Paul by my parents, and I have an older brother. I have two younger brothers and a younger sister but I grew up with my older brother, Dan, and we lived in St. Paul. We had a pretty decent childhood. I at least up until my parents divorced. Then I think that's kind of where some of the, I guess, memories kind of start popping in for me, like the more traumatic ones. Like, let's just say their divorce wasn't like, you know, very civil. Yeah, it wasn't a very civil divorce, and my mom had some pretty toxic relationships following the divorce of my dad. We primarily lived with my mom for a little bit, and during that time, I believe my dad was fighting for custody of me and Dan, or at least some sort of arrangement, and but we were still primarily with Mom. And my mom was with somebody at the time who physically and verbally abused her, and that was kind of my first time, I guess, witnessing domestic violence. At a pretty young age. I'd have to say I was like 5. But that's really scary. There's some pretty scary memories of that, of her sending us to the neighbor's house because he would disconnect the phone and we would have to go over to the neighbors to call the cops. And not knowing what was going to happen to our mom at that time, I just think of my own kids and like imagine, you know, if they were ever put through something like that. It's just heartbreaking. But yeah, where do I go from there?
Yeah, so it sounds like your dad had kind of was fighting for custody of you guys or some sort of like visitation.
Yeah, and you know, he was rebuilding. So the house that we lived at was my grandparents' house, my dad's parents' house. And so when they divorced, my mom actually took the house from my dad and he had to go and rebuild. So he was kind of doing his own couch hopping and staying with family and friends. And then I would say by the time I was in maybe second grade, my mom had been with my little sister's dad at this time, and I think this is when she was kind of involved in drug dealing or doing drugs, and her house ended up getting raided, and that's when we moved with my dad. I think we actually moved with my dad prior to that. I think she kind of knew that things were going to be getting bad at that point, so she had just accepted, like, okay, you guys need to go with dad. And then everything kind of fell on her. And so at that time we moved with my dad. His company had moved to St. Croix Falls. He's been with the same company pretty much his whole life.
It's like literally like 50 years or something.
Yeah, he's a super hardworking guy. We moved with him to Osceola, Wisconsin. I think I was 7 or 8 when we moved to Osceola. My dad had been dating somebody who is now my stepmom. She was a lot younger than him. I believe when they started dating, she was 18 or 19. So that's just a disclaimer. I like to throw that in there because our relationship wasn't very good for many years, mine and my stepmom's. I think she was a child raising children. I try to think of myself as 18, raising 2 kids that aren't mine, that are, you know, like just picture Raylan's age. Like, it's hard. All of it's hard. But yeah, I think my relationship with my stepmom was pretty rocky. Divorce of my dad. We primarily lived with my mom for a little bit, and during that time, I believe my dad was fighting for custody of me and Dan, or at least some sort of arrangement, and but we were still primarily with mom. And my mom was with somebody at the time who physically and verbally abused her, and that was kind of my first time, I guess, witnessing domestic violence at a pretty young age. I'd have to say I was like 5, but that's really scary. There's some pretty scary memories of that, of her sending us to the neighbor's house because he would disconnect the phone and we would have to go over to the neighbors to call the cops. And not knowing what was going to happen to our mom at that time, I just think of my own kids and like imagine, you know, if they were ever put through something like that. It's just heartbreaking. But yeah, where do I go from there?
Yeah, so it sounds like your dad had kind of was fighting for custody of you guys or some sort of like visitation.
Yeah, and you know, he was rebuilding. So the house that we lived at was my grandparents' house, my dad's parents' house. And so when they divorced, my mom actually took the house from my dad and he had to go and rebuild. So he was kind of doing his own couch hopping and staying with family and friends. And then I would say by the time I was in maybe second grade, my mom had been with my little sister's dad at this time, and I think this is when she was kind of involved in drug dealing or doing drugs, and her house ended up getting raided, and that's when we moved with my dad. I think we actually moved with my dad prior to that. I think she kind of knew that things were going to be getting bad at that point. So she had just accepted, like, okay, you guys need to go with dad. And then everything kind of fell on her. And so at that time, we moved with my dad. His company had moved to St. Croix Falls. He's been with the same company pretty much his whole life.
It's like literally like 50 years or something.
Yeah, he's a super hardworking guy. We moved with him to Osceola, Wisconsin. I think I was 7 or 8 when we moved to Osceola. My dad had been dating somebody who is now my stepmom. She was a lot younger than him. I believe when they started dating, she was 18 or 19. So that's just a disclaimer. I like to throw that in there because our relationship wasn't very good for many years, mine and my stepmom's. I think she was a child raising children. I try to think of myself as 18, raising 2 kids that aren't mine, that are, like, just picture Raylan's age. Like, it's hard. All of it's hard. But, yeah, I think my relationship with my stepmom was pretty rocky. Yeah. So do you want me to, like, dive into that, or what?
Sure, this is your story.
I didn't know. I thought you were going to be asking me questions.
No, you're doing great.
So, I had a lot of really good memories growing up in Osceola, and some really great memories that have built me into the person that I am today. When I say my stepmom was young, my dad was still pretty young as well, and they were in the honeymoon phase of their relationship. They weren't married yet, and they partied a lot, and we loved it. Me and my older brother, we loved when they partied because we knew it was going to be a free-for-all, and yeah, the weekends were fun. I remember playing bartender, and, like, I felt so cool mixing their drinks. Like, they'd be like, "Oh, you're doing so good. That's a great Captain Coke." And I'm, like, thinking to myself, yes, I'm going to be a bartender when I grow up. And I ended up being a bartender. But yeah, those were some of my earliest memories. I remember my stepmom joining in on their drinking games, but we only drink water, And then once we finally did get to graduate, eventually, to, having alcohol and drinking with them. By the way, the legal drinking age with your parents at the bar in Wisconsin, I believe, is 15. I don't
think there is an age limit, but
yeah, I don't know. I might have been a little younger.
it's pretty normal in Wisconsin to go to the bar with your parents.
Yeah, and that's how we all connected in our family, through food and through drinking. I mean, even like family get-togethers, Christmases, and all the events, it was always revolved around good food and everybody drinking and having a good time. So that was normal for me. Like, that's what family traditions were for us. So it wasn't like odd behavior when everyone was partying.
And it wasn't just your family.
No, it wasn't. I mean, we lived in this apartment complex, and everybody my stepmom's best friend lived in the apartment complex next door to us. So her and her boyfriend at the time would be partying with my parents, and then the downstairs people would be partying with my parents. So it was like the whole complex was just like throwing down on the weekends. And yeah, it was, I mean, those were fun memories for us.
Right. Right.
Then we ended up moving from those apartments to the trailer court probably like 2 years in. My stepmom was going to school, or she had just graduated, and she got a good job in the cities. And my older brother started to get like he started getting into trouble. So a lot of the attention was on him because, you know, he was kind of naughty. I'm not going to lie. He was going through his own stuff. He was drinking, he was, you know, smoking weed, smoking cigarettes, and I think I was a pretty good kid still at this time. Like I remember when we'd go out to eat with my parents and I would earn money for chores, I would, like, instead of getting myself something at the little shops, I would always buy my stepmom something or my dad something because I just, like, wanted their love. I wanted their acceptance. I was a sweetheart. Like, I look back at some of those things, like, or their anniversary, I would, like, clean the whole house and then I would leave, like, a cigarette out for each of them. And then I would go hide and wait for them to come home with their wedding dance song playing. So when they'd come home, they'd be like, "Happy anniversary," and anniversary would be spelt wrong on the paper. But, yeah, I don't know. I looked up to Amy. At that time, Amy's my stepmom. At that time, my mom and we weren't close because she was, I believe she ended up getting raided and she ended up, you know, having to serve some time for that. So the communication was slim to none at that time. So I was looking a lot to Amy for, like, this mother relationship. And she was kind of the one responsible for picking up, like, everything, you know, like, all the little girl questions that you ask a mom, or, you know, all of the times that I needed to dump on how much I missed my mom to her, or, you know, my mom's not showing up for me. They had to hear all of that. You know, they had to kind of, I guess, nurse me back to, or comfort me back to feeling like, okay, it's okay, you know,
Right.
support me through those times, because I needed my mom through a lot of those times in my early years, and, you know, she wasn't there. And yeah, those were some pretty hard times not having mom around. But anyway, Zach had been born.
That's
So
your younger brother.
that's my younger brother. He was like the golden child, still is.
He's a good kid.
He's really is a good kid. Yeah, so
He's not a kid, but
he's not. He's still my kid brother. So
he's like a full adult.
he's a full-on adult, but he's still my little sack of potatoes. That's what I used to call him. Yeah, this was probably around the time I probably started getting into some trouble, because I remember some of my ways of getting out of trouble or getting out of being grounded was to be able to take Zach on walks. And then I'd walk into town, and this is around the time too, and I'd be smoking cigarettes, stealing cigarettes from people's friends' parents and my own parents.
It's always how it starts out, right?
That's always how it starts, you know, like really getting risky and stealing cigarette butts out of ashtrays, like public ones. No, don't act like you didn't do that.
No, I've definitely done that.
So Osceola is pretty small. We were able to walk right into town, and, like, we lived in the trailer court. I would say a lot of the kids that also lived in the trailer court kind of had more of, like, rough upbringings. My best friend at that time, Anna, and I don't know if Anna will be watching this, but hi. Yeah, Anna and we grew up together, and we did a lot of our firsts together. She lived right up the row, so I remember going up to her house, and we didn't have cell phones back then, so when my dad wanted us to come home, he'd just do, like, this loud whistle, and we'd come running home like dogs. Yeah, before cell phones. But that was my childhood, like, riding bikes around, riding on the back of people's pegs, and, you know, stealing cigarettes, and then it turned into smoking weed, and then it eventually turned into drinking. I remember the first time I drank, it was with my stepmom. It was at one of their parties. They thought it would be funny to let me finally have a wine cooler with them, or like 2 or maybe 3 wine coolers. And I remember the reaction I got just for being so goofy, and like the feeling I got of like everybody like, oh my God, she's so funny. Like that for me was like the reassurance I needed. Like this is where it's at. You know what I mean? Like this is the cool thing to do. Like everybody accepts this. This is what we do in our family. I love this.
You've made it.
I've made it. I've finally peaked and made it to the point where I can have drinks with my family. Gosh, I think that was, I'm trying to think of the age of that. I want to say like sixth or seventh grade.
Okay. 13 or 14.
Yeah, 13 or 14. Yeah, because Raylan's what, 13 and she's in 8th grade. So yeah, I'd say like 7th grade. I have a list here too, just so I can stay on track. But at that time too, I was kind of bouncing around different friend groups. I had tried being in like volleyball or like track, and I was in some sports, but it was hard for my parents to, because they were working full time, so to like commit to, you know, having me be in certain things, it just didn't make sense. So, but I do have to say, one thing is my dad always showed up. My dad was always there for everything, for my childhood. My memories of like all the kids' concerts, everything, every sporting event that I did have, I remember looking and scanning the crowd, and there was never a time he wasn't out there with his big camcorder and like the big red button flashing. So I needed that as a kid, and now that I can do that and be there for my kids, I know how much it means to them, you know, to have a parent to look out to in the crowd. Yeah, it means the world to have a parent there. Let's see.
When would you say, like, you know, you talked a little bit about drinking and kind of the progression of how that looked in your life.
Yeah.
When would you say it turned problematic?
Probably when, oh gosh, it turned problematic when it became more normal for like high schoolers to like start drinking, like when we were drinking with the high schoolers. This is probably around the same time I became friends with Rachel. So it was me, Rachel, and Anna, and we spent a lot of time just running around town, and we hung out with a lot of people that were older than us. And that's what the older kids would do, the high schoolers. I mean, there was even a time we were hanging out with people that were in their 20s when we were really little. And we were drinking over there, and like eventually we were doing drugs over there. So I just think of like my oldest daughter doing that, and yeah, I'm sure a lot of people listening have probably had their own experiences of like the losers that would like hang out with little girls. I've definitely spent a lot of time hanging out with like some bum losers. But at the time you think it's so cool, you know, like these older guys want to hang out with us. So I would say like 7th or 8th grade. I think it was problematic because of those situations we were putting ourselves in.
Right.
Hanging out with these older guys that were hitting on us. You know, that's dangerous. At the time we thought it was cool, but you know, these guys were like sexually attracted to young minor girls. So it wasn't right and it wasn't safe. It's hard to say when it became problematic, because I think any child that age drinking at all is kind of problematic.
Right.
I wouldn't say it was like excessive until high school, but I was going to get into like the first time trying like harder drugs. So my parents smoked weed. They had like this little Altoids can that they would keep, this little canister they'd keep in their closet. And my brother, I think the first time I smoked weed was either with my brother and his friends or somebody, and I had no idea what I was doing. I honestly didn't like it the first time I smoked it. I hated how I felt. I felt like really just awkward and uncomfortable, and it was probably really poopy weed anyway. And but once it became more normalized within my friend group, then it just became like a regular thing. Like after school, sometimes we'd get lucky and like steal somebody's weed or like go to a friend's window and get a $5 joint. And like that was like the fun thing to do. Or like if my parents stocked up, from their own friends, like, yeah, we would go steal some of their weed. And I, at least had enough respect to wait till they were sleeping because they would know if I were stoned. And, a really close friend of mine, their parent, they were like a second home to me. And I spent the majority of, my afternoons, like when I get off of school, I go straight to their house. All my sleepovers were always at their house. Like that was my second home. And they were my family. And the mom, she was using drugs and she was drinking and stuff. And we would like sit up and play cards, and we'd play like 10,000, and we'd play dice, and like it was fun to like be able to stay up with the older people and like play games. And she'd give us cigarettes, so we'd sit and smoke cigarettes with them. And I think this was around 7th grade. And one time I believe the friend had been smoking meth at this time. And I was able to join the friend and her mom in the bathroom, and she would pull us in the bathroom individually and smoke meth with us. And I loved it. I'm not going to lie. Like, it was so much fun. Like, granted, like 2 hours in, she'd be telling us to go to sleep. And I don't know if any of you have done meth, but like you can't just go to sleep.
Smoke this and I'll go to sleep.
Smoke this, we're going to play some dice, and now you got to go to sleep. And then it turned into like, I'll smoke some with you if you guys help me clean. She also had a lot of like back injuries, and she had a lot of medical stuff going on. So she had, an unlimited supply of oxys. So that was around the first time I tried doing oxys. So we were stealing pills, and then there was this one time I took an oxy 80, or I split it with the friend, and we went and got our haircuts. And this is like probably the first time I actually experienced somewhat of an overdose. My little 8th, 7th grade body taking that much of a pill. And I remember like falling asleep in the chair I don't know, that was like it's a strange time. I think of my youngest or my oldest, and like, I always think, because she's right at the prime age of when I started doing these things. And I'd say I bounced between friend groups at this time too. So I had like my drug using friends, and then I had my friends that were actually, pretty innocent. Like they didn't smoke cigarettes. They didn't do, very into sports, I had this one friend who was very into, her walk with Christ, and like we did Awana and youth group and stuff together, and that was kind of my first experience finding a relationship with God. My parents didn't really go to church. It was not something, like, we just didn't really do that. So I went and found that on my own through friends. So what else? What else you got for me?
So, I mean, if you want to fast forward a little bit, obviously this progressed, and eventually, you graduated high school, and I would imagine that even though you were using drugs and like it still had this like manageability about it, because you hadn't really had any like serious consequences. Like,
no, there was a time where my relationship with my stepmom started to get really rocky. It was really bad, to the point where, we were fighting a lot, and my dad didn't know what to do with me. My brother was in a ton of trouble. My youngest, I'm sure they were worried about like, what kind of impression is this going to leave on, Zach, when the two oldest are like running around. My older brother was stealing their car, running away. I was starting to run away at this point. yeah, and I ended up going and moving with one of my best friends, Rachel, and her parents, and it was pretty short-lived. Like we were young and immature, and I remember we got an underage drinking ticket at a party we went to. And this was in high school, and my brother was at the same party, and I remember because I was living with my friend, my dad came to pick up my brother, and I like seen my dad and my brother in passing, and then we had to go with Rachel's mom. So that was like a worse punishment because Rachel's mom was like not about that bullshit. We actually got in quite a bit of trouble. We got grounded for like a month and, you know, couldn't use MSN Messenger. Like we couldn't go anywhere. And
MSN.
yeah. And then we started fighting, you know, because we were
Sure.
spending this nonstop time around each other. And I remember being like, Dad, can I come home? Like I just did not want to be there anymore because it was too hard for me. I wanted to go back where it was easy. So I went back home. I'd say whatever. This is when I kind of started to spiral. I was kind of a troublemaker, but it wasn't so bad to where like I was on probation or like getting, you know, crazy arrests or like doing anything crazy. I ended up getting my first boyfriend, I would say like 10th grade, maybe 9th grade. I don't remember. I was pretty young, but he was a few years older than me. And he was just about to graduate. And this was around the time I ended up going to an alternative school, mostly because I just wanted to like not be in school so I could be around him. And he, you know, we smoked a lot of weed. That's kind of what we did. That was our thing. We smoked weed and we drank. And I graduated early from the alternative school, and I ended up moving in with him and his mom. And I think his mom actually like was able to instill rules, and I respected her enough to follow the rules. Yeah, they had a lot of kids there too. So there were more kids like my age that were actually doing like responsible things. So I was actually around people that were making better choices, not just like these people who had parents that were smoking meth with us. You know, like it
Right.
wasn't like she kept a good eye on us. You know, we had chores and responsibilities, and yeah, I actually really appreciate that time. I think that's kind of around the time I started to grow up a little bit. Got my like first real job, and yeah, I dated him for a good portion, like 4 or 5 years. I dated him, and then we worked together. I had like this job at a factory. We worked together, we lived together, and then we ended up, it just didn't work. Like we just kind of grew up together, you know.
Right.
There wasn't any ill will. Like we still were friends after we broke up and stuff. But then this is around the time when my drinking started to get really bad. Like I remember I was always drinking, and drinking and driving. It was really risky behavior, a lot. Like if I didn't have a 30 case of Milwaukee's Best in my passenger seat, it was weird. Like it was always the cheap, like gross stuff too. I didn't care. And I always wanted enough to make sure wherever I was going, like there was a party and everybody was going to have fun. I kind of like developed or made my personality trait like the party person. I always had a party with me, you know. I was still working at this time, but I started like get into ecstasy and stuff, and yeah, things just weren't like going good at my job at this time, and I ended up quitting that job and moving in with my mom for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, that seems like a long period of time.
I had not lived with my mom since I was a small child, and it was around this time too that I had my first like really I would say it was somewhat of a suicide attempt. I don't really know what it was. I had a lot of mental health stuff going on, and I was really sad over the breakup that I had. It was like my first breakup, and I had this bottle of Vicodin, and I took the whole thing. And I told my friend Kelly that was there, I'm like, yeah, I kind of just took a bottle of Vicodin. You should call my dad. And my dad had to like carry me out and bring me to the hospital. And Kelly stayed with me through that. And after that, it was like it was time for me to just like remove myself from that whole situation. Like, so my mom ended up letting me come and live with her. And I started going to school. I decided to go to Century College for my human services degree, and basically I was getting unemployment from my job, so that was kind of paying for my alcohol habit and my weed habit. And then I needed to focus in school, so I had to get an Adderall prescription as well.
Of course.
Yeah, it makes sense. And before this, I had dabbled with meth, but it wasn't easily accessible to me, so I wouldn't say I was ever addicted to it until my 20s. But so I was going to school, I was partying a lot. I had met with this new like friend group, and this is where I met my oldest daughter's dad, Derek. And kind of around the time he came in my life was when I was like 20, 19 or 20. And I mean, we met just through partying, and we were not being safe, and I ended up getting pregnant. And I remember we obviously we decided we were going to keep it. We weren't in a position, I don't think, where we weren't trying to keep it. I don't really know. We weren't like mad about it.
Yeah.
We were like in that honeymoon phase of our relationship where we probably thought like, oh, this is going to make everything
Yeah.
better, right? Yeah. And this was also around the time when I started to get close with my stepmom again. I feel like she and I had that to bond over, the fact that I, was growing up and I wasn't like as irresponsible and whatever. So I ended up moving with Derek, and we got a place in Somerset, and I had my oldest daughter, Raylan, and this was when I was 22, so 2011. And I remember after Raylan was born, Amy actually took a week off of work. She prepared a week's worth of meals for me, and she showed up to my house every day, and she helped with Raylan. And she was, my mom was in the hospital too when I had Raylan. So was Derek's mom. There was just like a room full of moms. It was, I had a ton of support, but I think Amy really stepped up her game then. And it was actually really nice to have my mom's support. That's kind of when my mom started to show up a little bit more for me. Because she didn't really show up for me a lot in my childhood. So it was kind of her opportunity to start stepping up her game and like, building a relationship with me again. I was living with her prior to that. Like, so we were building a relationship then, but it was still, it wasn't like as tight as it could have been. I don't know. So where do I go from there? We were fine. Derek and I, like, we partied a lot still, but it was like on the weekends. And then, so around this time I was still going to school. I was a stay-at-home mom, so I was going to school and taking care of Raylan. And I don't know what happened, but I just, like, I think what happened with Derek and I is we were just really young and immature, and it was always like tick for tat, right? Like, we would go out drinking, and then he would do something really shitty to me, and then I would have to do something shittier back. And it was always like, oh, you went out tonight? Well, I'm going to go out twice as hard, next weekend. And it was that cycle, like, all the time, to the point where we just, like, all we did was fight. We didn't like each other. So we ended up breaking up. And I moved back in with my parents, Dad and Amy, at around 23 or 24. So Raylan was like 2 or 3. And during this time, my single, like, girl lifestyle came back in. So I was heavily relying on Dad and Amy to like watch Raylan while at night so I could go to the bar, you know, and then I would come back later that night or come back in the morning and like be hungover and take care of these responsibilities. And they probably, in their own way, probably thought like, okay, she needs to like get her shit together.
Right.
I was still going to school and at this time, I think, but I ended up having to get into my own place with a friend, and I ended up I stopped going to school and I started bartending full time. And then this is kind of where my addiction to pills came in. And I started doing I was trading my Adderall for Percocet. And I got really addicted to opiates, but opiates became too expensive, so I ended up starting to do meth. But I just want to say that opiates had gave me the same effect as meth would. So I wasn't getting like tired or drowsy. I would
Right.
get like that, you know.
Yeah,
But
they say that opiates impact certain people differently.
Yeah.
And the opposite, like,
it was definitely the opposite effect. I think that's why I had liked them so much. I
Yeah.
always had been more towards like the stimulants than the depressants, but so yeah, I started doing meth. I would say I was really trying to be a functional addict, and then I got into a pretty toxic relationship that nobody agreed with me being in. I mean, by nobody, I'm primarily talking about Derek. Derek was like my mom too. There were a lot of people that could see like, hey, this relationship's really toxic, and you should not be in it. But I had to figure that out for myself. And then we started using together, and we had our own place together at this time too. And Raylan was there part-time. And so she was witnessing a lot of this, this fighting. And gosh, it was really toxic. Like this relationship, he wasn't like, he didn't hit me, but he would like destroy everything around me. So he would like punch holes in the walls and like, threatened to destroy my stuff or like, so I was always like I was always walking on eggshells not to upset him because I didn't want him to like wake up Raylan to like put holes in the wall, you know, or he would always threaten to kill himself. So it was a manipulation tactic for sure. And I wasn't perfect towards him either. We were just not good together, and I had a lot of like PTSD from that relationship moving forward, like into our relationship.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it was all bad. I would say the only reason I say I was a functional addict is because I was hanging out with a lot of really dysfunctional addicts at this time. Like, I was the only one working. I was the one that was still trying to like live this double life. I was working, I was paying my bills, I was granted, I was not the perfect employee, but I was still making it to work, and I was still paying the bills and, making sure I had enough money to like have my meth habit supplied. I wasn't ever like dealing it. I was always more of like, I'm just going to get enough to get me through these couple days, and then I'll go pick up again for just myself. It wasn't like, oh, I gotta, like how you were. I need to go and get everything. And like, I tried to manage it. I tried to like live a double life for such a long time. And it got so bad in the relationship that I ended up kicking this boyfriend out. And in that time, the boyfriend was still coming to the house and breaking, like I took him off the lease, and he ended up breaking into my house, and he stole a bunch of stuff from me. And so I hated that part of my life. Raylan didn't want to be around me because, she was just seeing like
Chaos.
Yeah. It wasn't a safe place for her. Yeah, it was bad. So around this time is right when I got my first set of charges. So like I said, he was taken off the lease. He was hanging out with other people that were more in the mindset of like, well, we're not going to work. We're just going to steal stuff from people, and we're just going to, that's how we're going to fund our addiction. And I I was not hanging around them at this time, but they were still like breaking into my house and like taking things I'll never recover from. Like they took this laptop that was just a piece of shit laptop, but it had every single first of Raylan, all these videos, like the birth of her, you know? So all for what? Like a quarter gram of meth gone, you know? That was devastating for me. Anyway, he ended up getting involved with some other people and stealing a bunch of guns from somebody in Osceola. And because you are who you hang with, and the cops thought this is where he was staying, my house ended up getting raided, and he happened to be there. And they didn't find any guns because the guns were never at my house, but there were drugs there. So I got all of these party to a crime charges. He ended up going to jail. And since these were my first charges, they were like, okay, we're just going to give you, you know, a deferred prosecution because these are your first charges. These will be hanging over your head. If anyone knows what like a deferred prosecution is, it's basically like you have to follow their rules and do everything they say. And if you follow up with it, then you don't get these charges. It's null and void.
Right.
And I mean, I showed up to my court date. I got myself into treatment. And I would say right around this time is the first time I really tried to get sober on my own. And this was before treatment. It was right after I got raided. I was so depressed because I knew that Raylan wasn't going to be able to come over. Derek was pissed off at me. He's like, I told you, you know, I told you you shouldn't be with this person.
Right.
Like, look what's happening. Your life's falling apart. And, I mean, little did he know it had been falling apart for a long time. But I remember after getting raided, I was like, I'm not going to use. I'm going to get my shit together. I was scared at that point. And I could not use. So I would just drink NyQuil every time I would wake up for like three or 4 days. That's what I did after getting raided. I just drank NyQuil. Every time I'd wake up, drink NyQuil. And that was the only way I knew how to get sober. I didn't know how to get sober. And so I don't even think, and then after that, I obviously ended up using again. Like I couldn't figure out how to do it. Even the first time I went through treatment at programs, like I used the entire time. And just used like alcohol mostly, but like still I used meth, you know?
Yeah.
But I remember failing a drug test and getting kicked out, but I failed for alcohol. So I was like, but it's not meth, and I'm in here for meth. So, like,
Right.
I honestly thought that was okay.
Yeah.
And even when I told my parents, they're like, but you didn't fail for meth. So, like we were all on board that it's just alcohol, you know?
Right.
Anyway, I ended up doing treatment, got kicked out. I ended up getting more charged. So at this time, I ended up moving in with, I was living with another boyfriend for like a small minute, and then I ended up living with a friend for another small minute, and then ended up moving into Derek's apartment. But Derek wasn't really there. He was like living with his girlfriend. So he's like, sure, you know, like get your shit together. You can stay here. And I'm like, this is perfect, you know, as I'm still using, like not good at all. And I ended up getting a job right down the street. Like you could literally throw a stone at the job. It was a bartending job. And so I was bartending, and I was able to like walk to work if I absolutely had to. Somehow though, like when you're in active addiction, somehow you can still live like a block away and still be late, to your job. So
Yeah.
it's sad. Anyway, I ended up getting another set of charges at this time. It was a paraphernalia charge, and I got arrested right in front of an elementary school. How sad, how embarrassing. And I went to jail. It was my first time going to jail. And when I got out of jail, I got released the next day. The first thing I did was I was put on what was it called? The Daily
Report.
The Daily Report program. So in Hudson, I don't know if they still do this, but if you get picked up on charges, like you have to go through this period of time where you have to drug test 3 times a week, and it's at random, and it's at the police station. So like if you fail a drug test, you're getting booked in. And this was one thing that kept me sober for a small period of time. And then it got, like, I wasn't changing any of my friends though. So like I had like the consequences, like, okay, you know, if you use, you're going to go to jail. So that was enough to keep me sober for a little bit, but I was not changing my friend group. And so I ended up caving, and I used, and it so happened, like, this is where the manipulation and like the desperateness comes in, right? Like, there was a point where I would, if I had my third and final drug test on a Friday, I would go in right as they opened, because I knew I wasn't going to get another drug test until the following week on Monday at tops, right? At like earliest. And so I would go in that Friday morning, and then I would go and I would just get high just for like an hour. And then I would spend the rest of the weekend in a sauna or like in the gym trying to work it out. And I would just have the worst anxiety the whole weekend.
Just sounds miserable.
It's miserable, but that's the sickness, right? And I couldn't control it. I ended up using more and more, and then it would just turn into like a spiral, and I ended up getting a bunch of like bail jumpings. But then the manipulation came in, and at this time I was going to treatment in Balsam Lake. And so I had convinced the Daily Report Center when I went to court one of the times, I said, you know what, there's really no need for you guys to drug test me here. I don't even have a ride to get to court. That's why I have all these bail jumpings. I'm getting drug tested over in Polk County. I'm in treatment. Like, why do I need to do this anymore? So they're like, okay. Basically stopped the Daily Report Center, stopped drug testing me. And then I basically told the same thing to Polk County. I was like, I'm getting drug tested at the Daily Report Center. There's no need for you guys to waste drug tests on me. Okay, fine. You don't need a drug test here. They graduated me, and I was back to the same old shit. I was using again.
Then enter Kyle stage left, or is that just kind of?
Yeah, no, that you came in right around like probation. So anyway, I was done being drug tested, but because Polk County found out I got more charges, I ended up getting those felony charges that the deferred. So then I got probation. And probation is really where, like, I couldn't get away with a lot of the stuff. So I'm out of notes. So you'll have to help me through this a little bit.
Yeah.
But, so I was on probation, and I was doing pretty well, I would say, like, at manipulating.
Yeah.
This is probably around the time I met you.
Yep.
And around that same time, this is when my addiction went from just, you know, using the old-fashioned way to injecting. So I was using intravenously, and when I say it spiraled out of control, it spiraled out of control, like, so fast. That'll ruin, not saying using meth won't ruin your life, but when you do it that way, it really does. It takes...
Fast track.
It's a fast track to, like...
Yep.
So... Kyle,
yeah, I mean,
we're
we're off to the races. I mean, we were like fire and gasoline. I mean, it was like a very intense relationship, but I know that we spent a lot of time talking about like a different life. I know I had just gotten out of prison, and I knew where this lifestyle was going to end up.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really what was different for me was, you know, I knew that there was possibly a better life, and I think we connected on that idea. Neither one of us knew how to get there, but
No.
you know, and so I was in and out of jail, and
I was bartending,
you know,
at the time. So yeah, we were definitely trying to, like, I was still in this life where I'm trying to, like, have that balance, but it wasn't working, and I ended up getting I think I got fired from that job, actually. I think from gambling or something. My gambling was out of control at this time. Like, I would take everything I made in tips and directly sit at the machine, and I would leave with nothing. Every shift, that's what I would do. It was bad. honestly the fact that I was able to actually make, when I made an amends, I was able to apologize to them, you know, and I mean, I'm still friends with them on Facebook, so I hope this doesn't like, you know, bring up any hard feelings, but yeah, it was a hard time for me. My relationship with Raylan was, you know, not stable.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, she was not my priority. My priority at that time was, you know, how am I going to get high? I was always in crisis mode, constantly in fight or flight, constantly like, where am I going to go? How am I going to do this? And it got to a point where we were homeless, right? Because Derek was like, what the hell are you doing? Like, get out. Like, he ended up moving out of that place, and I had to move out. And so we were homeless. We were, you know, living from place to place. And I ended up getting pregnant. And right around this time, you had a warrant, right? And we could not get sober. Yeah. We couldn't pull it together. And it makes me sad because I know that there are a lot of times I hear people's testimonies, and, you know, they always say, like, I got pregnant and I was able to stop, and I was not one of them people. And there's a lot of shame that's tied to that, not having, like, the strength to be able to do that, or the decency to, you know, put a innocent child first. But, you know, that's just how strong the addiction was for me. I didn't know how to. I still didn't have the tools to.
You did, you know, ask for help at that point. And,
yeah, so we were homeless, like I said, and I was on probation. And you know, knowing what I know now, I guarantee if I would have reached out to my probation officer and asked for help at that time, but because I had such a fear in, like, the justice system, there was no way I would have. So anyway, I ended up calling the county, and I told them my story, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to tell them everything. I know they'll be able to get me into an inpatient treatment. And so I called them, told them the whole story, and I felt super confident. And within that same day, CPS was calling me. Then my probation officer was calling me. And I felt very, and then I think you went to jail, like, the next day after that.
Yeah.
So I'm by myself in this time. All I have are the people.
On my way back to prison, basically.
Yeah, and I'm by myself at this time. I get, like, kind of choked up talking about it, but, you know, I'm homeless. I'm like, God, what do I do? You know, like, my probation officer, she's calling me saying, like, if you don't come and turn yourself in, like, we're going to put a warrant out for your arrest, and you're going to get, like, child abuse charges. So I'm scared. I ended up shutting off my phone. I felt very backed into a corner. I ended up getting an abortion. I panicked. Like, it was a very scary time for me. I didn't feel I had support. You know, there were certain people, like, in your family that were very much like, you have to keep the baby, but nobody was here to help me.
Right.
You know, like, I was very alone. Like, your mom wanted me to keep the baby. And she was all the way in Alabama. So, like,
She was the only one.
yeah. So anyway, I ended up getting an abortion, and I kept it a secret. And I was very scared to tell Kyle. Probably within that same week, I ended up getting into inpatient treatment. I went to Arbor Place, and it was my first real, I would say, like, go around with recovery. I was able to work through that whole experience of, like, you know, getting an abortion, and work through the pain and the sorrow and the sadness that I felt. I had to break the news to Kyle upon going in there. And then, you know, Kyle's mom, she's very Catholic and very religious, and it was a really hard time. But in that process, I was able to experience, at this inpatient, I was able to experience my first friendships made solely out of recovery with it had been so long since I made true friendships with people. Allison, hey. I still talk to Allie every so often, and like genuine friendships.
Yeah. Like connecting with people on a deeper level and not just like transactional or drug.
Yeah, because that's what a lot of it was. It was very transactional. Like there was always an ulterior motive with the people I was hanging out with. Like, and I was very selfish and very driven by like what do I get out of this relationship?
Right.
What do they have to offer me? Is this relationship even worth having? Like, do they have drugs? Like, it was very selfish, but it was I made relationships and like learned how to have tools and like learned how to be sober. And I ended up so I did 30 days in treatment, and then this is when Julie had just opened a women's sober house in Richmond. So I was pretty excited. I ended up going to the Onyx house when they had the women's Onyx house, and I made it to about 58 days. And I remember I relapsed. I went and hung out with somebody that I shouldn't have. And I think I went there. I honestly went there with the intention of like not using. I wanted to have dinner, but I seen drugs there, and I didn't take a buddy, and there were a lot of things I could have put in place before doing this.
Hindsight's 2020.
Yeah, there's a lot of I think looking back, obviously now, like I would tell myself, why did you go there, for one? For two, like, come on. Anyway,
Yeah.
so I ended up going, I remember we had like this whiteboard, and it had everybody's sober days on it. And the guilt, this was the first time I felt like guilt and shame from using. And Kyle was still in jail at this time. And I had reached out to Kyle because we would talk all the time on the phone while he was incarcerated. And I was like, I had relapsed and I don't know what to do. I feel horrible. I'm looking at this board. It says 58 days. It's almost 60 days. And I feel like the biggest POS looking at this board, knowing that I'm not going to be at 60. I can't lie. Like, this is exactly what they tell you not to do. So he encouraged me to tell the truth.
Easy for me to say, right?
Oh, yeah. He's like, oh, yeah, you need to tell the truth. Like, so I ended up telling Julie, and Julie kicked me out, and I was not happy. I believe I was the first woman that was one of the first women there and one of the first to get kicked out. So I, had to give her some practice dealing with women, and that's probably why she doesn't have a women's house today. But I ended up getting kicked out, and so my probation officer, because remember, I'm still on probation, and they were happy. Like, I had to send in proof that I wasn't pregnant while I was in treatment. I had to send in proof of my abortion, so they weren't going to, like, have CPS on my ass. But I was still on probation, so I had to tell probation that I had relapsed, and they put me on house arrest.
Oh, that's right.
At my parents' house. And my parents were like, here we go again. Here's the shit show. No, so I got a job at SMC, and I was sober for a while, and it was about a month in I started using, and I was on the ankle monitor still, but I would go and I don't know what to blame there. I wasn't like working much of a program. Like, I hated living with my parents. Like, that was just a trigger in itself, like being around in your childhood home, like, you already know you're a stressor and a burden to people. Like, it's just an awful position to be in. No offense to them. It just is. Like, you don't want to be the responsibility of anyone else. And to top it off, I started using, and my stepmom, she knew. She caught on. She actually found a bag, because she did my laundry. She found a bag in my pants pocket, and I remember, like, going down. She's like, come here. Like, she was panicking. She was like, oh my freaking God, what do we do? And I'm like, standing next to her lying, and I'm like,
It's not mine.
oh my gosh, these must have been my pants from like years ago when I was in active addiction. And I'm like, let's go dump it out together. So after that, she was on to my bullshit. She's like, yeah, fucking, yeah, right. You know? So we dumped it out together. I didn't stop using, but I ended up getting, this is right around the time you got released. And Kyle got released to go into the lighthouse. And that was like probably the best thing for you at that time. You'll get to do your testimony. Hopefully I'll get to interview you. But I remember this time because it was very pivotal for my own recovery. It was like the first time I'd seen somebody and wanted what they had. I went to a few meetings, like, at this time, I was going to meetings, but like I was still getting high. So like I wasn't really in it, And I got off house arrest. I ended up getting a job at Green Oasis, and I ended up living with a friend and his mom, and I was going to meetings, but I was still using. And Kyle was actually doing things the right way. He had he was surrounded by support. He was surrounded by people that cared, and he like was in the pink cloud of recovery, and I was so envious of that. I was like, he didn't have time for my bullshit, and I didn't like that. Yeah, so
And I was on house arrest.
he was on house arrest, but
So there's not a whole lot I could do.
God, that was during this time, I'm working at Green Oasis. Kyle's on house arrest, and
You got that apartment.
I got an apartment, and I actually saved money and got this apartment, and I was pretty excited about it, but I was not living an honest life. So it was all a matter of time before it came crashing down. So Kyle and I would sneak off because at this time there was like no contact orders on us. Like
they did not want us around each other.
Ended up getting pregnant again. And yeah.
Yeah, at this point we weren't even supposed to see each other, right? Mm-hmm. And then
Kyle,
I had to go into the courtroom and let everyone know.
Yeah, so Kyle had to let everyone know, and
I didn't know that you were still using at that point, though.
yeah,
And
yeah, I was definitely trying to quit.
yeah,
And so one day I showed up at Green Oasis, and my probation was there, and a sheriff was there, and I went to jail. I went to Pierce County, and they transferred me because my probation was still in Polk County. So I sat for a little bit in Pierce and ended up going to Polk, and I sat for a few months. And I got the opportunity to do drug court. And that's where recovery really just, I was pregnant, but we were doing our own programs. So Kyle's doing Pierce County Drug Court. I'm doing Polk County Drug Court. There's still very limited contact on us. I have my own place. I don't think I was in mentally the best place. I think it was very smart to have us do our recovery separate and get that opportunity to show that we can do it without each other instead of really showing all of the signs of codependency. We had to be responsible for our own recoveries at that point. And once we did that, I think is when Mary Kelly started to...
Yeah, I mean, they had just literally lifted the no contact order. They had these rules in place. I couldn't stay over the night. I had to whatever. I had kind of not written off the relationship, but I had kind of submitted to the program and said look, I'm sick of going to jail at this point for seeing Samantha. I'm willing to do whatever you guys want at this point. I'm going to submit. I'm going to just follow the rules. And it was almost as soon as I said that, then a couple weeks later, Mary called me in and she's like, well, what would you feel about us transferring Samantha down here? And I was shocked.
Makes me want to cry.
But I mean,
because honestly, I'm thinking to myself, like, this Mary, she's just so hateful towards me. Like, I'm actually not a bad person. I really want to do well, you know. I just don't know how, you know. And being in Polk County, I don't think was like the best place for me. I didn't use, but I wasn't like happy, you know. I was lonely. It was very isolating. So when I got news that Mary was willing to take me down in Pierce County, it was such good news. And I'm like, what, 8 months pregnant at this time?
Yeah, you're about ready to pop.
Yeah, so we move in back into this little one bedroom that was my apartment that Kyle took over when I went to jail.
Oh my gosh. On a side note, you
No.
held that over my head for
I was like,
months.
you just wanted my apartment.
You wanted my apartment, this little shitty apartment.
It was mine, though. It was my little one bedroom. And either way, so.
We just thought that was like the greatest place, too, when we got it.
Well, there was a time when we were homeless and we were like looking at rentals and stuff. Like we were going to have this one day. Like I remember we were getting a tour of like this rental that was literally side by side from his old plug's house. Like we're like, this is our future. We're going to build from here. Like that was our dream, our goals. So like being able to finally live together and like do recovery together was a huge, huge step in our own relationship. And we had the support of drug court, like helping us through these things. Mary Kelly and Sharon, you know, Sharon in Polk County was a huge support for me. But Mary was there for me so much, like for my pregnancy.
I remember when she showed up with her husband with like a bunch of gifts for Christmas.
Diapers, everything. And there were times when I had like postpartum depression and she was an angel. Like, anyway, fast forward, we did pretty good. Like, drug court really changed our lives, gave us a lot of the tools we needed. Alex was born. My relationship with Raylan was more prominent. What's the word? Prominent. It was more prominent. Like, I was actually getting Raylan, you know, more often.
Consistently, yeah.
It was consistent. I was stable for her. I was showing up for her in ways that I hadn't showed up for her in the past. And when did we?
So Alex was 2. We had graduated just basically about 6 months prior to that. Had graduated from drug court.
Graduated from drug court. I was doing the stay-at-home mom thing for a long time. I mean, when people say stay-at-home mom life is easy, it's not. It's not. And I was breastfeeding on top of that. So it was like a full-time job. I ended up doing a training or like applying for the Recovery Coach Academy.
Yep.
And I got a job doing like a recovery or peer support through Canvas Health. And at that time, I felt really confident in my recovery, but out my office window, I literally could see where I used to use. And I think enough downtime in there and enough time away from doing the things that I was supposed to be doing. Because at this time, too, we're not on probation anymore. We're not doing anything for our program. Did we go to meetings anymore?
Rarely.
I don't think we did at all.
Yeah. I was just working and
Kyle was working nonstop, like all the time. So I started working and I started getting this freedom, and I ended up relapsing. And how did that go? Like,
I don't remember. All I remember is Raylan's birthday party, and that was on Mother's Day, and shit kind of hit the fan. I ended up getting super drunk because I found out, or no, I just started drinking, and then it came out that you had been using for a while, and then I decided I was going to drive and go find some drugs, which is really hard after you haven't used for 3 years. So I ended up driving like 3 hours away to get drugs. And then, anyway, I don't really remember what came, but we had a huge falling out.
I remember what happened. I remember I had called all of these people on Kyle.
Oh, yeah, because I wasn't coming home.
Kyle's using. Kyle relapsed. And so everybody's reaching out to Kyle and his support system. And I didn't, fill everybody in that I was using at that time.
Yeah.
Right. And,
Yep.
so Kyle had called the cops to have me removed because we did quit, but I couldn't stop. Like, it was just, I was already getting to a point where I was, relying on it to, like, go to work and, like, do things, like, to be a normal person. That's how I felt normal. So everybody was suspicious of it already. And Kyle involved, I think he got advice from Mary Kelly, and she was like, you need to get her help. If, she's unable to quit, you need to get her help. And so CPS got involved. And when they got involved, we peed clean. Like, I ended up going away. I, like, went and hid out at Derek's house for, like, a week just so I could pee clean. And then I came back, peed clean. We all did hair follicles. Alex's came back positive, and mine came back positive. Did yours?
Yep.
Yours came back positive, and Alex was removed from our care. And that day caused so much panic. I remember that day like it was yesterday. It was the most traumatic time of my life. I didn't understand why he tested positive. I was using outside of the home, but I was also, skin to skin cuddling with him. So if you guys don't think that's a real thing, it is. It can absorb through your skin into your child's skin and get in their system. And the shame and the guilt.
Yeah. Mixed with all the emotions of like not knowing what that process was going to look like and where our son was. It was over a holiday weekend, and I remember that really, really clear because we were like panicking, like we don't even know where he's at. You can't, and then you go into court and it's like they're all speaking legalese. You have no idea what's even going on. You don't have an attorney.
I remember asking my parents, anybody. I was reaching out to anybody that I thought cared.
Yep.
Please don't let my son get lost in the system. Please help us. Take him. Nobody could. And that's kind of a lesson I had to learn, I think, is that I had expectations of people, expectations for people to step up in ways that they couldn't, or they didn't know how to, or they just didn't want to. I think I held a lot of resentment from that. I think you did too. Mm-hmm. We were very angry at our families. It was a hard thing to like go through that without your family, because there was a time when we just didn't talk to them, I mean, it was our own doing, but you just think like if the shoe were on the other foot, like
Right.
if it were my kids, would I do that for them? Would I step up and do that? I feel like I would. Right. It was a hard time. And dealing with CPS was very traumatic.
Yeah.
We were a thorn in their ass. Let's just say that. We got an attorney. We worked really hard. We did not use, we did everything that they wanted us to do, and we did it right away. And thank God we had been through a drug court, because we had all of these tools. We had known, like, we made this community already of people. We knew where to go, who to contact, who to support us, like who was going to help guide us through this process. Mm-hmm. And thank God we did, because there are a lot of people, there are a lot of women, there are a lot of men out there that have no idea where to begin. They don't have a support system like we do. And why wouldn't they continue using? Because the most important thing in your life was just removed. The thing that gives you purpose, the thing that you love the most was just removed. Why wouldn't you continue using? Why wouldn't you want to like take that pain away?
Maybe right now is a good time to plug. you know, those experiences are a big reason why we're trying to do what we're trying to do with the sober house for women, you know, and children, because, you know, from our own experience, like, it
It's
just,
it's hard to go through that, and I mean, we ended up getting Alex back in our home after 6 months. Want to add in too that I got pregnant again.
oh yeah, during that process. That's
During
right.
that process, so that was not like, that didn't feel the best to tell CPS, like, by the way, we're expecting. So during this time, we actually got really close with the foster family. The foster parents, I remember we were like Googling them once we got their names, and we're like trying to figure out what's wrong with these people. Like, there's no way, like,
They were having like fundraisers for at their wedding for like
animal
the
shelters.
animal shelter,
Like, there was nothing wrong with them. They were like the picture perfect family.
yeah.
And I think that was really hard. One of the hardest things that I went through as a mom was, is he going to like it more there? Is he going to call her mom? Is he going to want to run to me with open arms, or is he going to prefer her over me? Like, these were questions that like haunted me. So I knew it was in my best interest not to hate the family and not to resent them, but to give them the most respect and to treat them with support and love, because they are taking care of the most important thing in my life. So, like, I know a lot of people get really angry at the foster families, but
And that relationship really was good and blossomed into something that was really
of course
a
it
great
did.
relationship for us. And, you know, eventually their parents, who our kids still to this day call Mimi and Papa, like,
That's where they're at. If you're wondering where
why it's so quiet in here.
they
Yeah.
are with, so Caitlin and Brandon, they are oh no, the foster parents that originally took Alex, and the Caitlin's parents kind of stepped in as grandma and grandpa during this time. And we ended up like slowly starting to kind of like meet up with them and hang out with them. And then it got to a point where we were like choosing to hang out with them, right?
Even after CPS was like out of the picture.
Yeah, so we got Alex back after 6 months.
Yep.
This was unheard of. Like, this doesn't happen
Yeah,
usually.
the judge even said, like, this never happens.
This is like an 18-month process usually. And I want to say that this wholeheartedly had a lot to do with having an attorney.
Yeah.
We were very fortunate to like have a good attorney and like have somebody advocating and explaining these things to us and like really pushing this process forward. We called a lot of people. We had, we had our ducks in a row for this. Like, this was a wake up call for us for sure. So we end up, you can help me fill in these pieces too, because, it is getting late, but.
Yeah.
So we end up getting really close with the foster family, and Alex loves them, right? And I remember sitting down at Dean and Darby's, this is the foster grandparents, and they were having like a big birthday party, maybe, I think it was a birthday party for Alex, and Lennon was just about to be born, and I remember asking them, this was right when CPS was about to like be out of our lives, and he was about to come home permanently, and I asked them if they would continue being Alex's Mimi and Papa, going forward. Like, I know how much he meant to them as much as they meant to us. I think Darby probably filled in a lot of my mommy issues. She filled in, like, the areas, I think, where my parents didn't step in. Probably for you too. So I'm still very close with Darby to this day. Darby is I love her. I don't know what I would do without her. Where'd it go from there? Like, I mean,
Yeah. So you fast forward, we ended up getting really close with the foster parents. We ended up going to work with them.
We took vacations with
You
them.
know, we had a really great period of time, and during that process, again, we drifted away from our recovery and what we knew had worked for us. And I think for me, and I can kind of look back at it now, I felt like there was this false sense of like normalcy. Like I didn't have to do all of the things anymore. I was hanging out with people that didn't have problems with drugs and alcohol. You know, it made me kind of like feel like maybe this wasn't a problem for me. Like maybe I could have drinks or maybe I could whatever. And it got really bad. I don't even want to say really quickly. It was like a couple successful times for us, and then it's like shit hit the fan. And you know, I think, you know, we ended up losing our job. We really messed that relationship up pretty good with them. We had to go back to treatment.
Yeah, let me get into that. So, we're really tight with these guys. You know, we got really good positions working with them, and Alex and Lennon are going to daycare, and Alex is going to school, and we feel like we have life figured out. We're going on vacations. Like, we have enough money to, like, pay off our credit card debt. Like, it was unheard of. Like, I think we put a lot of our ducks in this basket of, like, materialistic things. Like, our values were more in, like, we're going to go on vacations and we're going to do things. And then we got to this place where we weren't like happy and thriving in our recovery. We were just waiting until this next vacation.
It was like external stuff, trying to fill our buckets with
Yeah.
stuff.
And so we ended up going on a vacation to Mexico, and we, in our defense, we did order non-alcoholic, and they did serve us alcoholic drink. But we could have, you know,
dumped it out or done anything else, but
and that flipped a switch in our brain where we're like, well, you know what? We're in Mexico. It's fine. You know, we don't have a problem so much with drinking. Like, we can have a couple drinks. And mind you, we're around people that really can do that and, like, can stop. And, you know, I have to apologize again publicly to Brandon. It was just Kyle, myself, and Brandon that ended up going on this vacation because stuff happened at the group home, so Caitlin couldn't go. But, I mean, Brandon,
he got steamrolled by
really did.
a couple of seasoned alcoholics and drug addicts, and I don't know. I couldn't imagine going and being put under that kind of pressure, but
we convinced him that we were fine. Everything was fine. It was not fine. Kyle, Kyle ended up passed out behind a dumpster in Mexico, sweating his ass off. I remember he started getting to a point where he was like getting mean, so I like getting angry drunk. So I went up to the room. Brandon stayed with him for a little bit. He wanted to be a good friend and, like, you know, make sure he was okay. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing this. So I went up to the room, went to sleep, and room service called, and they're like, yeah, come get your husband or your boyfriend or whatever he is. He's sleeping behind the dumpster. And I'm like, oh, here we go. We had to wheel him up in a wheelchair up to the room. And I remember the next day having to talk to Caitlin, and it was like talking to a very angry parent. But she's not an angry person, so she was very nice. And this is where I was put on the spot, because I think I had already played it out in my head that I didn't have a problem. I didn't pass out behind a dumpster. I was a normal drinker. Like, it was fine. I convinced myself in my head that the focus needed to be on Kyle. Kyle was the problem, not me. And I could drink, like, and be a functional alcoholic if I wanted to. You know, Kyle was the one that's a mess. You know, he can't drink. He especially can't drink tequila. So as Kyle's hungover the next day and we're talking to Caitlin, Caitlin's like panicking at home, and she's like, what are we going to do? Do you guys need treatment? Do you guys need to do outpatient? And we're like, no, you know, this is a lesson. We're just not going, you know, we're not going to drink tequila. We're not going to drink hard liquor. We're not going to drink ever again, right? Until, was it our next vacation?
Yep.
We went on another vacation, and there was tons of layovers. It was chaotic. Like the whole way home was a mess, and we ended up like having layover in Cincinnati. Was it Cincinnati?
Yeah,
Cleveland.
Cleveland.
Yeah,
Oof.
it was Cleveland, and we ended up having a couple drinks at the hotel. And then we had decided, because everything was fine and we woke up fine, like we didn't do anything crazy that night. We didn't fall asleep behind dumpsters, like we didn't get out of control. Like we got this. You know, we can be like normal drinkers. And I remember making a rule, we can be normal drinkers when we go out of state. So as long as we're out of state and we stick to like the lighter stuff, right? As long as we're not doing like Long Island iced teas. So we went to the casino, and it was Treasure Island. So it's like not in Wisconsin, and we had drinks there and it was fine. Like nothing crazy happened. And then our wedding was coming up, and we ended up going to Vegas and for our bachelorette party. And I mean, ended up drinking. That was our goal, right? And we came across a hooker who had meth, and we ended up getting meth from her. First, we lectured her on why she shouldn't do meth, and then in our addict minds, we're like, well, maybe we can do it. I don't even know.
Yeah, we're in Vegas.
We're in Vegas, so maybe we can. So we ended up doing it, and we sat in the hotel. Like, we had family come with that wanted to celebrate with us. We even had someone in recovery come with. And we spent the whole time, like a big chunk of the time in the hotel high. And as we're using, we're like, what are we going to do when we go back? Like, this is already so hard to stop.
Yeah.
Sitting here, like, I knew like we should dump this in the toilet and not use anymore. But just coming to that like decision was so hard in itself. So we end up going home, and we didn't use. We stayed sober, and it was miserable. We didn't tell anybody, so we were like struggling big time. We struggled a lot through that time, especially like, you know, not. I think we went to a couple meetings between, like, we knew, like, but we didn't tell anybody that we had relapsed like that. And then our wedding night, we got married on September 9th, and we still had our recovery community thinking that we weren't drinking, and we were doing fireball shots in the bathroom of our wedding. And we went to a bar, like, where our entire family went, and our friends, people in recovery, and we were sneaking shots when people weren't looking. And we ended up going to a hotel over by the casino, and we were supposed to go to this show. We were supposed to go to, like, I don't know, what was it? I don't know, a concert. We didn't go to the concert. We ended up, like, linking up with somebody that does meth, and we spent that night on our wedding night doing meth. And that was really hard, right?
Yeah.
It was a hard thing to, like, this, I had, like, these expectations of, like, my wedding night is going to be beautiful, and it's going to be, like, I remember, like, this is where I really turned to God, too. I remember the night before my wedding, laying in bed, and I was looking on Pinterest, and I was saving Bible verses, and I was like, I'm going to be able to reach out for help. I know I'm going to be able to reach out for help. I'm going to ask God, and I'm going to pray to God, and I'm going to ask for help. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but so I'm like trying to connect with God in some way or another, and begging him to give me the strength to tell on myself and get help, because I know it's just getting out of control. It's spiraling. Then we get married, and then, you know, end up at a hotel getting high, and we go pick up our kids, and God gave me the strength to reach out. I reached out to the pastor of our church, and I reached out to our friend Sophie, and we had a safety plan in place. we had worked one out with Dean and Darby and with Caitlin and Brandon in case, because we always told them, in case of a relapse, if we relapse on meth, looks a lot different than alcohol. And, we wanted to be prepared. We didn't want CPS involvement. Like, we wanted to do things the right way. So we created a safety plan with them, and was it the same day that we picked them up? They knew something was off.
It was like the next day.
I admitted that things were spiraling out of control. I remember crying to them when we picked the kids up, and I only admitted to alcohol use. That's all I was ready to talk about at that time. And it was like a day later. It was so bad that we wanted to continue using, right? I mean, it was...
Well, we did.
Well, after the kids got picked up. Yeah.
Basically, they came and got the kids.
Yeah, so Kyle reached out and he talked to Darby and he talked to Dean and was like, you need to come get the kids. This is bad. Like, we relapsed on meth. We need help. We had an intervention in our house. I was working, and I remember coming home, and Brandon and Caitlin Brandon was pulling away with the kids, and I seen Brody in here, and I seen Ryan, and I was like, oh, here we go. And honestly, I wasn't even mad. I was ready. I knew I was ready. I knew I was ready for something to happen. So we had intervention in our house, and we knew we had to go to treatment. Caitlin sat with us, who was also our boss at the time, so she was put in a really strange position as she's, taking responsibility of our kids, having to figure out who's going to fill the positions, who's going to pick up the slack at work. We put them in a really tough situation at that time. We couldn't find a treatment. It was pretty late at that time. It was like 5:30 or 6 or something, and we couldn't get a hold of any place. So we had agreed we were going to go to treatment, we were going to go to inpatient, and then our jobs would hopefully be, they had agreed that we would be able to come back to work once, But we spent the next week getting high, and it spiraled really bad. We went back to shooting up that week. The kids weren't here, and it hurt. It hurt the very depths of our soul, and every time I would
By
feel...
the grace of God, we made it to treatment.
So the next 2 days after, we finally got a hold of Hazelden, and Hazelden had 2 beds for us on Friday. At this time, it was Tuesday. So we're like, fuck it, we're just going to get high this next couple days. Well, we didn't realize that all these other people were really scared for us in this time, really scared for our well-being. So they're calling wellness checks on us, and we're just trying to be high in secrecy until we get in our treatment. So we got really paranoid, loaded up our stuff, because we came home after being gone for a little bit.
Yep.
And there was a police officer's card in our door, and we're like, shit. All these thoughts are going through our head. What are we going to do? So we pack up bags and we go stay at a hotel in Forest Lake. And by the grace of God, we ended up actually going to Hazelden that Friday morning. It was September 15th. And we went to treatment. We did the program. In that process, we lost our jobs, so we really had to start from scratch. Thank God we had just had a wedding and we didn't spend all our money, because we had to put that into our rent. Our relationships went to crap with Brandon and Caitlin. We said and did a lot of nasty things out of resentment, and I think that they did too. I think we had a hard time building trust with people at that point. We felt like we held up our end of the bargain when it came to completing all the things that we agreed on. And it felt like the roles weren't really reversed. But thank God, we had people that took our kids in. CPS did get involved again, but it wasn't involvement like we had expected. It was more or less like, okay, they just wanted to confirm that we were following the safety plan, and they ended up actually helping more than they did any harm. It was a very good experience this last time around.
Very supportive, yeah.
Alex, we got out after 30 days. We completed it, and we got right into outpatient treatment. We were able to go get our kids that same day if we wanted to, but we actually chose to keep the kids with Dean and Darby during that time for a couple of weeks, just so we could get back in our groove, find jobs. I had to find another job. Kyle had to really dive in at work. I ended up starting work, and then I enrolled in school. So within that next couple months, I was starting school. I was working this new job, and I was working with my sponsor, who was really putting me through the steps. And, I got really involved going to meetings, and I took it really serious this time. I never thought I would go back to school, to be honest. I think it was the best thing for me. A lot of people really stepped up and, welcomed us back with open arms. Again, I feel like they've seen us come and go so many times. I was always worried, like, how are they going to take it this time? We did it again. But the recovery community here is just so great. It's amazing. Now I'm almost done with school already, and I'm going to go for my bachelor's. My relationship with my family is amazing. I think the thing that's most important to me and what's really helped me stay sober, we just celebrated 16 months, but what's really helped me stay sober is having a village. The fact that I have a village, I have people that help me with my kids. It's not all piling up on me. I never feel too stressed. I never feel too alone. I never feel too isolated. And when you have a village of people, you don't have to go through it alone. Like, that's so important. Like, this never has to be something that you have to do alone. Like, you need your community. And I found that community in River Falls. And I thank God for it every day. I thank God for the forgiveness I've received and the grace that I've received from people. But yeah, I mean, it's just been such a journey. Like, this experience, this last go around has been, like, the come up's just been amazing. This is my first time sharing my testimony, and I've set goals now, and I work as a forensic peer support, and I do advocacy on the weekends, and I'm interning at a treatment facility. Like, I'm doing all of these things, and it just sometimes doesn't even seem real to me. I'm finally following through with things that I never thought I would do again. And
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing how, you have these setbacks, but you kind of come out the other side and you're like stronger in your recovery. You're able to support people today in ways that, you probably wish people had supported you at some points in your life.
oh, absolutely.
And,
That's what I want to be for other people. And that's a big reason, going back to, the peer perspective. The mission there is to open up recovery homes for women, to be somebody else's village. Because I have my village, but, like, what about the women that don't have their village? How can we keep women and children together? How can we keep men, women, and children together? How can we keep families together? How can we offer them resources to be able to have services done in the home rather than having your kids removed and that trauma happening? That's such a passion for me. That's ultimately what I want to do. In somehow, some way, I want to be involved with CPS in some way, where how can we offer these services and give them the services they need without putting them in foster care. My experience with foster families has been amazing, but, like, I don't think it's necessary to have your kids removed all the time. Or
at least maybe reduce the amount of time that they are out of care.
Yeah,
Make
for
it
sure.
least traumatic experience as
the
possible.
least harm done, right? And it's not only harming families, it's harming the children too. We were very lucky. Our children have ended up with amazing people.
And not everybody's as privileged as we were. You know, we had a leg up in a lot of this, you know, our experience and being able to afford an attorney. Like, not everybody has that
Right.
ability. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm so glad that you talked about that, because that's a huge reason why we want to do the things that we want to do and be able to support people in that way. And, you know, I just have to say, like, hearing you share, you know, I love you. And I'm just, like, so grateful to be able to see, you know, your journey and be able to walk beside you in it. And you're just an amazing person, and I'm really honored and grateful that you. Are you crying?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously hearing that, you know, and all the stuff that we've gone through, and to be able to still be together and still be married, that's so rare. And to like be able to, you know, make that choice together to go to treatment. You know, that the odds are truly against you when you are dealing with something like meth. They truly are. Like, the chances of people succeeding, even one person, let alone two, it's the odds are so against you. So to be able to, you know, have each other and still love each other through it and work through the resentments, and like, I can be your 80 when you can only be my 20 at times, you
Right.
know, and
Yep.
yeah, it's amazing, and our kids get to have us. You know, that's not something we could have said if we would have continued going down the path we were going. So,
Yep.